Every time Marcus Aurelius nearly broke, and what saved him? The lamp is almost out of oil. Outside the tent, the Danube is a black ribbon under a sky with no moon. Inside, an old man sits on a low camp stool, his knees aching from 30 years on horseback, and he picks up a pen anyway. He is not writing a letter. No courier will carry these words to Rome. No senator will read them. No name is attached to them at all. He is writing to himself. You can imagine what that kind of writing looks like when nobody is watching. Not polished. Not composed for effect. Just a tired man, past 60, trying to talk himself through one more night. And on this particular night, he writes something strange. A line about a man who wronged him, deeply, publicly, in a way that should have ended in blood. He does not explain who. He does not explain what happened. He simply reminds himself, in Greek, in his own hand, what he intends to do about it. We will get to that man. But not yet. Here's what most people miss about the man writing in that tent. His name was Marcus Aurelius, and by the time he wrote that line, he had already buried more of the people he loved than most of us will lose in 3 lifetimes. A father. Sons, more than one. A brother who ruled beside him. A wife of over 30 years. A world he thought he understood, before a plague and a war and a betrayal took turns trying to break him. This is not a story about an emperor. This is not a story about a philosopher with a famous book of quotes. This is not a story about ancient wisdom you can put on a coffee mug. This is a story about a man who kept almost breaking, and the exact, specific things he did, over and over, in the dark, that kept him from breaking all the way. You are going to meet the boy who lost his father before he could remember his face. You are going to meet the plague that came home disguised as a victory parade. You are going to meet the son he buried after a routine surgery went wrong, and the brother who died the same year. And you are going to meet the man from that opening line, the one who wronged him, and what Marcus chose to do when he finally had the power to destroy him. Stay with me. Because none of this ends the way you'd expect from a man they called a Stoic. Marcus Annius Verus is 3 years old when his father dies. He is too young to remember the man's face. What he grows up with instead is a story, told by uncles, by tutors, by a grandfather who becomes the closest thing he has to a father, about a man of quiet dignity and modesty, gone before his son could ask him a single question. Marcus writes about him decades later, in the opening pages of Meditations, piecing together a portrait from other people's memories because he has none of his own. You don't choose the losses that shape you before you're old enough to understand what loss even is. Marcus didn't choose this one. It simply became the ground he stood on for the rest of his life, a boy raised by a grandfather's household, watched closely by tutors who noticed, early, that this particular child did not cry the way other children cried. Even as a boy, his biographers wrote, neither joy nor grief changed the look on his face. That composure will be tested in ways nobody in that household could have predicted. Fast forward. Marcus is emperor now, 40 years old, ruling jointly with his adoptive brother Lucius Verus, an arrangement so unusual that Rome had never seen 2 men share the throne as true equals before. The empire has just won a war against Parthia in the east. Soldiers march home through the streets in a triumph. Crowds cheer. It looks, for a moment, like the beginning of a golden decade. But it gets stranger. Those same soldiers carry something home with them that no triumph can celebrate. A disease, later called the Antonine Plague, spreads out from the returning army into every province the empire touches. Historians still argue over exactly what it was. Smallpox, most likely. What isn't argued is the death toll, somewhere between 5 and 10 million people, over more than a decade. Entire villages emptied out. Roman writers described towns left with no one to farm the fields, homes standing open with nobody left inside to close the doors. You have to sit with that number for a second. 5 to 10 million. Not soldiers on a battlefield who signed up for the risk. Farmers. Mothers. Children. An emperor's own household, no more protected than anyone else's. And it wasn't finished with Marcus yet. In the year 165, one of his sons, twin brother to a boy named Commodus, dies. 4 years later, in 169, another son, a boy named Verus, dies during what should have been a routine surgical procedure. Something as ordinary as a medical operation, and Marcus loses a child to it anyway. Of the 13 children Marcus and his wife had together across their marriage, only 5 would live to see adulthood. Read that again. 13 children. 5 survived. Here's the part nobody tells you when they quote Marcus Aurelius on a poster: the man who wrote that you have power over your mind, not outside events, buried 8 of his own children. He did not write that sentence from a place of theory. He wrote it from a tent, after burying a child, trying to get through the next hour without losing his mind entirely. This is where a word matters. The Greek term is apatheia, and it does not mean what it sounds like in English. It doesn't mean apathy, doesn't mean not caring. It means freedom from being ruled by a passion so overwhelming it destroys your judgment. Marcus grieved. The sources make that clear. What he refused to do was let grief become the thing steering the rest of his life. That refusal is not the same as not feeling the loss. It's closer to something a parent does at a hospital bedside, falling apart on the inside while somehow still functioning, still making the next decision, still showing up for the people who need them to hold together. Marcus was doing that same thing, in a canvas tent, in the middle of a war, while an empire of 70 million people needed him to keep making decisions. And the same year he loses that second son, 169, the empire takes one more thing from him. Lucius Verus, his adoptive brother, the man who has shared the throne with him for 8 years as an equal, drops dead. Possibly the plague. Possibly the exhaustion of years on campaign. The sources aren't certain. What they are certain of is the timing. The same devastating year that took Marcus's son also took the one person who had carried half the weight of ruling an empire beside him. A father lost too young to remember. A plague that turned a victory parade into a funeral. 2 sons buried. A brother gone in the same breath. And Marcus is still, at this point, only partway through what's coming. Pause here for a second, because it's worth actually letting that sink in instead of rushing past it. By this point in Marcus's life, he has lost his father as a toddler, buried at least 2 of his own sons, watched a plague kill millions of the people he was responsible for, and lost the brother who shared his throne, all within the same handful of years. Most of us will never face that much loss even once. Marcus faced it in a single decade, while still running an empire. If you're finding this as heavy as I am, that's the point. This isn't a highlight reel of ancient wisdom. It's the real weight behind it. If you want to see exactly how he kept standing after all of that, and what happened when the betrayal came, because it does come, stay with me, and hit subscribe so you don't miss where this goes next. So how does a person keep functioning through that much loss without turning to stone, or falling apart completely? Here's what most people miss about Marcus's answer: it wasn't a single moment of triumph. It was a daily practice, repeated so many times it barely looked like anything from the outside. Every night, in that tent, he wrote himself a new set of instructions for how to get through the next day. Not once. Not as a phase he grew out of. For years. One of the phrases he returns to again and again is worth hearing in his own words, translated: people look for a quiet place to retreat to, in the country, by the coast, in the hills, but there is no retreat more peaceful, no retreat more free of trouble, than the one found inside a person's own mind. So, he tells himself, constantly give yourself this retreat. Renew yourself there. Read that again, and remember who's saying it. Not a monk in a quiet monastery with nothing else to think about. A man commanding armies on a frontier, grieving dead children, running an empire of 70 million people, telling himself, every single day, that the only ground steady enough to stand on was his own mind. The Greek word for that steadiness is autarkia, self-sufficiency. Not isolation. Not pretending you don't need anyone. Just the quiet, stubborn confidence that your sense of worth, your ability to keep functioning, doesn't require the world to stop taking things from you first. And the world was not finished taking things from him. In 175, Marcus loses his wife, Faustina. They had been married for over 30 years. She had traveled with him on campaign, through wars, through the plague years, earning a title most Roman wives never received, Mother of the Camps, for how closely she stood with the army itself. After her death, Marcus doesn't just grieve privately. He has her formally honored by the state, and he sets up a charitable foundation in her name to support the education of young girls across the empire. Whatever else was true about their marriage, and Roman gossip had plenty to say about it, Marcus chose to answer her death with something built to outlast his own grief. By now you might be wondering how much more one man can lose before something breaks. A father. Sons. A brother emperor. A wife of 30 years. And Marcus is not finished. Because the same year Faustina dies, something happens that no plague, no war, no death could do, something aimed directly at him, on purpose, by a man he trusted completely. There's one more thing you need to know before we get there. The man from the opening of this video, the one Marcus wrote about that night in the tent, the one who wronged him, he's about to walk on screen. And what Marcus does next is the reason people are still talking about this emperor 2,000 years later. His name is Avidius Cassius. For years, he has been one of Marcus's most trusted generals, a skilled commander, governor of Syria, a man Marcus relied on to hold the eastern half of the empire steady while he himself fought wars on the northern frontier. They are not strangers. They are not rivals. As far as Marcus knows, they are something close to friends. Then, in 175, word reaches the frontier that Marcus is dead. Or dying. Nobody is entirely sure which rumor started it. And Cassius, believing the throne is empty, does something no trusted general is supposed to do. He declares himself emperor. Now pay attention to this part, because it's where most people expect the story to go one way, and it goes somewhere else completely. If you know anything about Roman history, you know what other emperors did to men who tried to steal their throne. Nero had his own mother killed. One emperor had his rival murdered and paraded the man's head through the streets of Rome. Betrayal at this level, in this world, ends in blood. Every precedent says so. Marcus is not dead. He is very much alive, and he now knows that a man he trusted with an entire province has tried to steal his empire, believing him too weak or too gone to notice. And Marcus's first move is nothing. He doesn't march on Cassius immediately. He doesn't even tell his own troops what happened, worried they'll want blood before he's decided what justice actually looks like. He simply waits, for a while, to see if his old friend will come to his senses on his own. Cassius doesn't. So Marcus finally calls his soldiers together and tells them what's happened. And here is the part that should stop you in your tracks. He tells them the goal of this campaign is not to kill Cassius. It's to capture him, so that Marcus can forgive him, publicly, in front of the entire army, and prove that there is a right way to handle even a civil war. This is not a story about revenge. This is not a story about proving strength through punishment. This is not a story about an emperor protecting his ego. This is a story about a man deciding, in the middle of the worst personal betrayal of his life, that mercy was still the harder and better path, and choosing it anyway. Before Marcus can reach him, Cassius's own soldiers turn on their new emperor and kill him, hoping to win favor with Marcus by doing the job for him. And when the news reaches Marcus, he doesn't celebrate. He weeps. Not out of grief for a friend he loved, the man had, after all, tried to take everything from him. He weeps because the one thing he wanted most, the chance to forgive Cassius to his face, in front of everyone, has been taken away. When Cassius's private letters are recovered afterward, full of the plotting and the correspondence that would have let Marcus identify every conspirator, he refuses to read a single one. He orders them burned instead. He tells the Senate that he wants his reign to remain unstained by the blood of any senator, and asks that no one connected to the rebellion be put to death. Think about the last time someone hurt you badly enough that you had to decide, on purpose, whether to hold on to it or let it go. Think about a parent sitting by a hospital bed, waiting for news about someone who wronged them, and realizing the anger doesn't matter anymore compared to the chance, maybe the last chance, to make it right. That is the position Marcus is standing in. Except his hospital bed is an empire, and the person he's forgiving tried to take his throne, his family, and his life. This is the man from the opening of this video. This is the line he wrote to himself that night in the tent on the Danube, the decision about what he intended to do with the man who wronged him, made long before Cassius was even dead. Not punishment. Forgiveness, prepared in advance, so that when the moment came, his mind was already made up. That's the whole method, laid bare in one story. Marcus didn't wait to see how he felt in the moment and hope for the best. He decided, ahead of time, who he wanted to be when the worst happened, and then he let that decision, not his anger, make the call. Marcus never stopped losing things. Even after Cassius, even after Faustina, even after the sons he buried, there was still more ahead of him. His surviving son, Commodus, was already showing signs, by his late teens, of becoming everything his father had spent a lifetime trying not to be: reckless, self-indulgent, uninterested in the discipline that had defined Marcus's entire existence. Marcus made him co-emperor anyway, in 177, hoping, maybe against everything he'd learned, that the boy would grow into the role. He wouldn't get to find out. Marcus died 3 years later, on the same frontier where he'd spent so many nights writing to himself, likely from the same plague that had followed him his whole reign. So what do you actually take from a life that looks, from the outside, like one loss stacked on top of another? Here's the first thing. Marcus's calm was never the absence of pain. People love to imagine stoicism as some kind of emotional armor, a way to stop feeling things. That's not what you just watched. You watched a man lose his father, his sons, his brother, his wife, and nearly his empire, and grieve every single one of them. What made him different wasn't that he felt less. It's that he built a daily practice, in the dark, in a tent, to keep that grief from deciding who he became. Here's the second thing, and this one's for you directly. You are going to lose things you cannot control. That's not a Stoic prediction, it's just what being alive means. The plague, the betrayal, the sudden deaths, none of that was Marcus's choice. The only thing that was ever his was what he did with his own mind in response. That's the whole inheritance he left behind. Not a way to avoid pain. A way to keep functioning inside it. And here's the last thing, the one I want you to sit with. When Marcus had every reason, every justification, every precedent in Roman history to destroy the man who betrayed him, he chose forgiveness instead, and prepared that choice in advance, so it wouldn't depend on how he felt in the moment. That is not weakness. That's the hardest thing a person can do. The people history remembers as strong aren't the ones who won every fight. They're the ones who had the power to destroy someone and chose not to use it. So here's my question for you. Out of everything Marcus lost, his father, his children, his brother, his wife, or the betrayal of Cassius, which one hit you the hardest? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. Marcus Aurelius never called himself a philosopher. He never called himself a Stoic. He called himself, in his own private words, simply a man doing his best to remain a good one. He wrote that down not for you, not for history, not for anyone at all, just for himself, on a night when it would have been easier to stop trying. And 2,000 years later, you're still listening.